President Ronald Reagan shocked the world when he announced in 1994 that he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. The former president all but disappeared from public life, and we really never knew what went on behind closed doors. Until now. President Reagan's daughter, Patti Davis, was by her father's side as the disease progressed, and the moment he passed away, she was there. She's now speaking out like never before about his final days. In her new book, Floating in the Deep End, How Caregivers Can See Beyond Alzheimer's. And Patti's joining me now. Patti, thank you very much. I really enjoyed reading the book. You're very raw in it, and I appreciate you speaking openly about a problem that I'm facing personally. And if you don't mind, let's start at the very beginning. Looking back, what were the first signs that your father might have Alzheimer's?
You know, I was living in New York at the time when he was diagnosed, and for a few years before that. So I think that can be kind of a murky area of, you know, when were the first signs of something. They actually did see plaque on his brain in 1989 when he fell off a horse, and saw the first signs of Alzheimer's when they did the PET scan because he had to have surgery. My mother did not tell him at that time, which I don't agree with. I think that patients have a right to know. And then obviously in 1994, things had progressed enough that she told him, and then he told the world.
Yeah. So as a child, you used to say that, and I'm going to quote you, my father can do anything. And you comment in the book that your dad, interestingly, would light up, his eyes would come awake when you talk about the water. What was that experience like?
Well, water for me was always such an important element and theme. We learned to swim probably before we could walk. You know, my father was a lifeguard, so his kids were never going to drown. And you know, we spent days and days at the swimming pool at our house. We used to rent a beach house for a while in the summer, and I would follow my father out into the ocean and turn my back on these huge waves and listen for him to say swim so I could body surf and carry the wave would carry me to shore. And I was scared, but I wanted to be with him. And he taught me so much about life by teaching me about the ocean and about tides. And you know, if a wave is coming at you and is going to crash on you, you dive down deep to where the water is still, and you wait out the wave going over you. And to me, metaphorically, that is such a life lesson. You know, you dive down deep to where things are still. And I think that anybody going through losing a loved one to Alzheimer's, that really is what you have to do. You have to find that place in you that is still and quiet and reflective. And it's not easy to do. And sometimes you can get it and sometimes you can't. But that's going to be your salvation. That's going to be your way out of the stress that turns so many caregivers into patients themselves.
Yes, and I'm witnessing my mom beginning to lose her memory of people that I know were close to her. There was a point where your father no longer knew who you were. I fear that day. What was it like for you?
Everybody fears that day. But I want to say, I don't think that Alzheimer's can destroy love. So even if your loved one doesn't remember your name, they remember that they love you.
Yeah.
I do not think this disease can destroy that. And I think we hold that out there as this thing that we fear. And so then when it happens, it's maybe bigger than it needs to be, if that makes sense, because we've already set it up with such fear.
Yes. Now, your parents were Hollywood elite. Then your dad runs for the governor of California, and then ultimately becomes the president. This is a very busy life. Did not leave a lot of time to attend your sports games or other childhood events. Do you feel like you really knew your mom and dad growing up in that world?
Oh, absolutely not. But I don't really blame that world. My parents, I think no matter what their occupations or careers were, my parents were a unit unto themselves. They were a complete circle, and everybody orbited outside of it, including their children. And that's just that's the way it was. And yes, I was resentful about that. I was angry about that. I wanted more attention from my father. But, you know, I write in Floating in the Deep End about this, and I think it's really important that when this disease enters your life, you really have to assess where you're coming from, not just what you should do with your loved one, but who you are being. Because if you're still a resentful 17-year-old for whatever you didn't get from that parent or whatever they did to you or didn't do for you, you're not going to do very well in this experience. So I think it's really important to go, okay, you know what? Let me assess who I am and what I'm bringing to this experience. And for me, it really was a wake-up call that I had to grow up. Yeah. I had to grow up. I'd had a very long post-adolescence, and I had to grow up.
Your dad was iconic for many reasons, and the quotes that he left us are priceless. I still remember, like it was yesterday, when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded, and when describing their final moments, your dad said, I'm going to quote him, "They waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God." You write with great detail about being at your dad's bedside the moment that he himself took his last breath, when he also touched the face of God. Can you share that moment with us?
So the morning of his death, he hadn't opened his eyes in probably a week. And his eyes for, I would say, almost a year hadn't really been blue anymore. They'd faded to this kind of milky grayish blue. The moment before he died, he opened his eyes. He was present. He was clear. His eyes were blue again. He looked at my mother, and then he went. And if I ever needed a validation for my belief that there was a soul in there that was intact, that was not eroded by disease, that moment was it.
Yeah, trapped. Now, I'm glad you're speaking out about this, because while there are so many books about caring for a newborn baby, there's precious little guidance for how to help your loved one contend with an end-of-life disease. So coming up, Patti Davis shares 3 ways caregivers can better cope as they care for a loved one. We're back with best-selling author and daughter of President Ronald Reagan, Patti Davis. She's here to give you advice to any of you caring for a loved one with dementia or any other kind of sickness or disease. So, Patti, when it comes to supporting caregivers, what are we getting wrong in this country?
Well, I think the medical community, even though they know about caregiver stress and they know how dangerous it is, they know that caregivers, particularly of people with dementia, are very likely statistically to become patients themselves or even die before the person that they're caring for. But I think also it sort of says to the medical community, you know, come on, can you care a little bit more for these caregivers? You know that they are at risk for disease. So let's try to prevent them from becoming patients themselves.
Well stated. So let's start helping today. Let's give caregivers 3 ways they can better cope as they care for a loved one with dementia. So I'm going to lay them out here. The first one is going to stun you all. But I actually heard this first from Maria Shriver, because she had to use this tactic with her dad, Sarge Shriver, when he was dying of Alzheimer's. It's to embrace lying.
Yes.
It's your friend,
Yep.
You say. Why?
Lying is your friend. And most of us were raised with the idea of you always tell the truth, which is fine in life. That's fine. Alzheimer's is a different world. Lying is your friend. If your loved one thinks that there are people on the roof, don't say, no, they're not. There are no people on the roof. Yeah, you know, there were, and I got them away. They're gone now. What's the harm, right? It's going to make your life a lot easier. Yeah, so lying is definitely your friend.
It gets them out of the spiral, which I'm also witnessing. Next, you say meditate. This works for all caregivers.
Yes. It's again, it's going down beneath that wave, like my father said about the ocean. It's finding that silence in yourself. You know, we don't want to do that because there's pain there. There's grief there. And, you know, one of the things that is really important to embrace in this disease is the grief that has to start early. You know, we're very expert at avoiding grief because it hurts. We think if we push it away far enough, it will disintegrate. It doesn't work like that. Grief is not biodegradable. It will wait for you and it will come find you. And if it has to come find you, it will bring you to your knees. It will bring you to a standstill until you deal with it. So meditating can be scary because once you get to that still place within you, emotions are going to come up. They have to. You have to let them. And just, in a sort of clinical aspect, if anybody thinks, well, now I have to learn to meditate. There are guided meditations that are as close as Google. Deepak Chopra, I'm sure you know, has a number of them.
Deepak does meditations on OzTube, which is free for everyone to come enjoy. So I encourage everyone watching right now to come to DrOz.com and check out Deepak and other meditations that are wonderful. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on new videos to live the good life.